Hello, everybody. I'm happy to be here. My name is Derek Binkley, and I am going to be talking to you today about building a serverless API using Node and AWS. Before I get started, just a little bit about me. I am from Wisconsin, which is a U.S. state in north central United States. So we're getting our third day in a row of snow here. Winter has already begun. But I do have our state has does have a connection to Greece. I wanted to bring up, I live about 100 kilometers from the city of Milwaukee. And in Milwaukee, we have an NBA team called the Milwaukee Bucks. And if you haven't heard of this, the MVP of that team is, his name is Giannis Antetokounmpo. And he and his brothers also play for the Greek national team. They're originally from Greece and have moved to Wisconsin. So he has brothers. Two of them are here. He actually has three brothers that all play basketball. I believe they're all at various teams in Wisconsin. So that is just a small connection. But about me from a tech side, I am the engineering lead with a company called Localize. We provide translation solutions for SaaS and tech companies, although our translation solutions also work on basically any website that you can imagine. So that is my day job. And I'm going to talk to you about something very specific. Something that I did a lot was a consultant before I started with Localize. I would help my customers bring up, I would get a customer, a client, and I would be charged with creating a solution for them. And one of the things that came up a lot is that they didn't, let's see, how do I put this? They needed to have a solution handed off to them, and they wanted to make sure that they didn't have to, hire a DevOps person and manage a lot of infrastructure after I left. They would bring me back to make changes, or they might hire another consultant to monitor things from time to time, but they didn't want to have, and they weren't in the place. Oh, I don't have sound at all. I just heard. So let's see here. I am moving to my external microphone. Can you hear me now? Oh, okay. Never mind. Sorry about that. Okay. You can still hear me. Okay. Gotcha. Let's see. So I will, I will go ahead and continue on. So as my my clients would, my clients would want a solution that didn't have a lot of infrastructure, and so serverless was a really good answer for them, because there weren't servers that they had to care about. And so I say there's no servers in serverless. Well, yes, there are still servers there. But the nice thing is that we are not stuck having to manage those servers ourselves. But there's still a lot of configuration that we need to do to make this all happen. So what are we going to have as goals for this type of API? I would like to make sure that we have, let's see, be able to develop locally. That's really important. We can't be uploading our things every time, our code every time we make a change just to test it out. We want to be able to develop it locally, so we need tools that support that. And I want something that can be automated and reproduced. The that's really important because there are often times when we have, you could easily go into you can easily go into a see here, into the AWS CL console, not the CLI, but the console. You can click around, you can create all sorts of resources and wonderful things, but that's not reproducible. You would have to go and do that again for your staging environment and your production environment. So what we would see here is what we want to have is a solution where we can automate it and reproduce it automatically. And I want something that's going to be testable. That's going to be really important because we want to have that as part of our CI/CD, is just automatically run tests. So what components are we going to use from AWS to help us achieve that? We're going to use a Lambda function. That's going to be the serverless function that actually runs our code. So that's the code that we're going to write. We're also going to need some sort of data storage. For this example today, I'm going to use a DynamoDB because that is, let's see here. DynamoDB is a great, well, it's a built-in AWS database. So I'm going to use that as my example. But realistically, you can use and connect to whatever data storage option you would like. But preferably, it's something that is something that you can orchestrate yourself in AWS. We're also going to have a virtual private cloud. That's going to kind of happen behind the scenes. The solution I'm going to show you today doesn't really even, we don't need to really care about that because it's just going to happen. But what that essentially is like the firewall that is going to sit around all of our resources and be protected so that the public can't get to things that we don't tell them they can get to. Now, how does the public get to it? They're going to send things to our API gateway and to make sure that unauthorized accounts don't get there, we're going to look at some sort of authentication. So what tools are we going to use? First, we are going to use the serverless framework. Now, this is not something that is through AWS. This is actually, if you go to serverless.com, you'll see this where that framework lives. It's a tool that you can use not just with AWS, but you can use it with, I've used it before with Azure. There's a ton of cloud providers that you can use, but just note that the configuration will be a little bit different because as soon as you start configuring things, you very quickly get to be very specific to the cloud provider. So that's just a warning. It's not a write once, run anywhere type of solution. But it is really nice because it gives it a lot of CLI tools. If you don't want to use that, an alternative, AWS has something called SAM. I can't remember what it stands for, but it's essentially the same thing where it lets you build up a application and it gives you all the tools to deploy and things like that. So we're going to be using Node, well, specifically JavaScript. Node is going to run our JavaScript. And we're also going to see the AWS CLI. So I have all of those things installed already on my computer for our demos. So once those are installed, what is it we need to do to start building an application? There's a few setup things that I've already done, so I don't guide you through it. But I wanted to mention that these need to be done. You need to set up your credentials so that the serverless command can upload stuff to AWS. So you're going to get your key and your secret and set those up. Those get set up in some config file somewhere. And after that, the serverless command will just work. And to help get started, serverless has a create template. So you can do serverless create and ask it for the AWS Node.js template. That's what I based this on. So you will see that in my examples. And there's going to be only 2 NPM packages that we need to install to run the applications today. One is serverless offline. This is going to be really important, but it doesn't need to get deployed with our application, which is why I run serverless offline with save dev. So it's just a dev dependency. And what this is it's a plugin that lets us run our serverless functions locally. And this gets to the first goal that we had, which is to be able to develop this locally and test it locally as we're developing. So that's what this serverless offline plugin provides for us. And since we're accessing AWS resources, we need to install the AWS SDK. And that will need to get deployed with our function. So you can see here, this is a shortcut to serverless. You can just type SLS if you like. And if you run offline, then you get a local host 3000 running kind of a sample function. So this is that first piece of the puzzle of running locally. Now, the next piece of the puzzle that I've already configured for you, but I want to bring up is the DynamoDB database. This isn't a database talk, so I'm not going to go in depth with it, but I just wanted to let you know that even though this is an AWS service, you actually can run it locally. There are two different ways that I know of to run it locally. You actually can, if you have Java installed, you can actually run it with a java-jar directly from a jar file that you can download from AWS. I prefer to use a Docker image just because it's something I can destroy and recreate and not really not have to worry about how it gets installed on my specific machine. So it's something that I can bring up anywhere based on a Docker configuration file. Now, both of these, whether or not I use either of the options, or if I'm actually connecting to production or a staging or something at AWS, there's AWS commands that allow you to interact with that. So if you're running locally, you could just specify an endpoint of localhost. I think it's port 8000, but you'll see I'll show you an example of that in a little while. So if you're familiar with Docker and Docker Compose, this should make sense to you. But if not, I'll just kind of do a quick overview of how I'm getting DynamoDB up and running. Basically, I'm bringing an image, the latest image from Amazon, which they provide for us. And if you see there, I've got a command. You can see how we're actually running the -jar file, and we're telling it where our data is. So, and then we are exposing port 8000, which is the default port. And I'm setting up some volumes so that the data is persistent, which is useful for long-term development, so that you can destroy and rebuild your Docker container without losing your data. So the DynamoDB commands, if you have this is part of the AWS CLI. So if you have the AWS CLI installed, this is their command line. And every product within AWS has a kind of a subcommand. So you can see here, I typed AWS DynamoDB, and then I issue a command to DynamoDB. In this case, I'm telling it to list the tables. There's 30, 40 different commands that you can run, some of them to actually modify data, others to just list your setup and give you information, or to actually create the tables themselves. So here's an example of the table that I created for our example today. So I've just taken the create table command through the CLI. I've given it a name called trading card. So today I'm going to be talking to you about Pokemon cards. If you're not familiar with that, it's a trading card game. I don't know how widespread that is. I think it's around the world that people know about Pokemon cards, but just in case, we'll be looking at like these little cards that my son collects and plays a game. And this is just for an example. I'm just setting up a table to keep track of those. And since DynamoDB is a NoSQL database, I don't have to specify the entire table schema. I just have to tell it the attributes that are important. For example, the primary key. So you can see I've set up a hash key called Pokemon name. And so all of this stuff that we just talked about, the table, will get created in my config file. Serverless, the serverless framework, or whether if you're using AWS SAM, they both have some sort of YAML file that you configure. In the serverless instance, it's called serverless.yaml. And that is where you configure all of your resources, you configure everything. And AWS resources such as databases and things that aren't specifically the serverless functions will run into a resources section that's going to be pretty much like a CloudFormation template. If you've used CloudFormation, you'll know that it's a way that you specify what resources you want in AWS via a file. And you can use variables and such so that you can orchestrate that for staging and production and various environments. Okay. So now I've got the basics of what we're going to do. Let's actually take a look at some code. So I am going to see here. So I ran that SLS offline, and you can see here I've got localhost running at port 3000. And this is dev hello. So how does that happen? Let's take a look. This is our serverless YAML file. You can see here, I gave it a plugin of serverless offline. And let's see here, yes. And then I'm using the AWS provider, runtime of Nodejs. This is all stuff, talk to you about the API keys in just a little while. I've given it a default stage of dev and my region where I want it to deploy to. And this is the heart of the function. I've said, okay, I've created a function called hello, and this is what code is going to run. This is the handler. You can see here I have something handler.js, and I have a function called hello. So I've just written a little bit here to return a status code of 200 and to echo back the event that gets in there. So let's take a look and see what happens when I run this. So you can see here, I'm just using Postman to run this. I've got my URL, and you can see here that I get a lot of, I get some information, input information, like the body. If this was a post, I would get that in there. But I get a lot of information sent to me in that event. A request context. A lot of this is going to be important later. An API ID, an API keys, lots of stuff for user authentication. And specifically, there is a query string parameters, path parameters, the path that's running it. All of that information gets passed into you, so you have access to all of that. And if we go back to our code here. So this is, and then this is how we define that path. We said, okay, we want it to be /hello, and we want a get method. So let's do something a little bit more interesting. Let's take a look at, well, we need to save some data before we do anything else. So I'm going to create a new function. Making sure everything is lined up right here with the columns, the tabs. Otherwise, oh yes, I think that always gets me. Yeah, so that's one trouble I have with YAML is sometimes things don't get lined up as they should. So let's see what code do we want to actually run when we invoke that. So I've got another function here called saveCard, which maps to my handler.saveCard. And I'm just bringing in So I'm bringing in some input. I'm looking at I'm parsing out the body as JSON. I'm not doing any error handling because I didn't want to clutter this up. I just wanted you to see the basics of how an API could look. And then let's see here. So this is the TC handler, which is save. And where is my TC handler? IMS. So I'm just passing this data in, and then I'm doing a return data result. And that is a function that I need to write really quickly here. So I need to pass in my data. Oops. And let's see, I would need to return something kind of like this up here. So let's return status code of 200. And the body that I'm going to return is just my data as a string. Okay, so that allows me to return some data. So I'm going to restart this. And you'll see here, okay, now I have a post, a way to post in data. And before I get back to showing you this, I'm going to go ahead and add, okay, let's actually find some data as well. Let's see here. Oops, sorry. Okay, so let's create another function called find cards. And we're going to do, so we've defined a post and a get on our path. So let's set this up. Let's export another function called find cards. And this has to be an async function because when we are accessing the DynamoDB, that runs asynchronously. So it doesn't have to be if we're not accessing async methods, but chances are you are going to do that. So here I've got, okay, look, I've got a promise, and oh yeah, so I'm looking at my DynamoDB table, and I'm just doing a table scan. I've defined table name. Did I define that? Yes, I defined that up there. That is getting passed in from my serverless YAML because it's a variable up here. Something I've seen people do is you may want to have it be dev trading card dash dev trading card dash staging, so they can put variables in there to make that dynamic. I didn't go as far as that today. Just trying to keep things simple so that you can see how this works. So I'm just doing a table scan, and I'm not passing in any queries. But you can see here, I am going to, oops. Yes, there we go. We are expecting some sort of result that's going to have a count of scanned items. And that's if I had some sort of filter clause. This would tell me how many items it actually found out of the total that it looked at. And then it also gives us our items. So we're going to resolve that and send that back to the browser. So one really nice thing here is that we don't really need to worry about all of the specifics about how that API gets routed, to and from, because AWS is handling all of that for us. So let's see here. I'm not getting that in there. I think this might be an indent. Yes. Indentation. So yeah, the HTTP has the parameters of path and method, but it needs to be indented properly for YAML. Okay, so now we have a post method where we save some stuff and a get method where we get that. And so let's see here. I have a save So I've already saved this. This is just the name of a Pokemon, and I gave it just a random number, and I saved it in there. So let's see what I've saved both from this this last time, as well as what some of the past times I've given this talk. I think there's some data in there. So you can see here, you get a timestamp automatically set up, or actually I created that, didn't I? Let's see here. Did I? So in our save, yes, I put in the created and updated at there. So, but yes, you can see this is what you would expect. You've got an API that lists back the information that you have saved. So now something else that we are probably going to want to do in our API is to extract just a single single element. So let's just see what that would look like. You can kind of guess now that it's going to follow a pretty standard format. Let's see here. I'm not getting my I'm not getting my template showing up for some reason, but that's okay. This is pretty easy. So I want to do this, and I'm going to call something called read card, and I'm going to actually add something here, which is a path parameter. So this will we'll take in something and create a variable for us called name, and it's going to pass it into an array called path parameters. So let's take a look at how we want to handle that and find that on this side. Let's write another function here. So we can, okay, read card is what I called it. And I'm going to bring in my event. And then, let's see here. Okay, so again, I'm wrapping this all into a promise. Here, I'll save this so it reformats it. And I'm just, I'm doing a get command here. So, and I'm passing in the path parameter that comes in from the path. And then I'm just, you know, kind of just packaging up the result.item because I'm only expecting with a get, I'm basing this on the primary key. And I see a item there. So let's take a look. You can see here now I have yet another method that has been created. Oh, that's kind of hard to see that light gray on blue. So sorry about that. But the important part is this this path here. So let's run this. Let's say I'm just going to take. So this is interesting because if you see here, I have some of these that are created more than once. And that's actually going to give me an error when I do the get because this is a primary key. And unlike a SQL database, DynamoDB apparently doesn't, or at least I didn't set up a unique key. However, the get is expecting something as a unique key. So I'm just going to grab one of these that I only have one version of and set this up. So and put this here. So you can see I've got my get method, dev card, and Rattata, the name of the Pokemon. And it brings back that data. And I'm just kind of curious, yes, this is a case sensitive key. I know some databases aren't case sensitive by default, but DynamoDB apparently is. So as you can see here, I've got my data back, and it was just handled automatically, or not handled automatically, but just packaged up and put together. So that didn't take too long. We set up a pretty quick API. Now, there's a couple of things that you would need to do before you actually deploy this. The first is, well, the indentation on this is off. See here, is to set up your IAM, which is IAM stands, I don't know what it stands for, but it's basically the way you set up roles within your within AWS. So you need to tell it, okay, I want my functions to be able to get to DynamoDB and do these things to it. And you're also going to want to actually have this create the table for you. So you so under this resources and then capital R resources, not sure why it's duplicated, but that's okay. You can see here we want to create we can create any sort of AWS resource that we would like, and we can give it the properties. You can see here, this is just the same stuff that I did when I created it locally. And then you can give other parameters like the throughput, read capacity, write capacity, and whatnot, whatever you need to do for that resource that's set up. And then if you wanted to use the name of this table or the connection in your somewhere else, you can actually put an output section after this and get those as variables. I'm not actually going to deploy it because I don't think you want to sit here while things get uploaded to AWS. But I wanted to show you what that looks like. Yeah, you just do SLS deploy. That's going to be your default, or you can set up your own stage. You can override any other parameters, like if you want. Some places that I work with, they have, their production is a different region than their staging or whatever. So if you need to overwrite some parameters like that, you can definitely do that here. So you see we have a way to deploy multiple environments with a single command, which I think is really cool. So the one more thing I wanted to talk about, but we don't have time to really go through today, but I want to mention it so that you know when you're building your own serverless applications that you will probably want to add some auth at some point. There's a couple of options that you can do that. An API key is something I mentioned was I had created up here. So let's see here. Oh, yeah. So under my provider section, which is where I configure the stuff for AWS, I've said, okay, under the API gateway, I want you to create a key for me, and I want you to name it either the opt stage or the provider.stage. You use one of those two variables dash my first key. So, and what that'll do is just create a single key. And then what we would do to generate that is to say private : true. So, and then it will automatically it knows, okay, this API key, I can set that up. So then you would pass in that API key as an x-API-key header, and you're good to go. That's fine for maybe for testing or an internal API, but you're probably going to want to have some bit of more advanced authentication. So that you can create an authorizer function, which is essentially your own Lambda function that will run and check to see if a user is valid. You can also integrate with Cognito, which is a AWS specific method of storing and creating users, which gives you all sorts of stuff like forgotten password, emails, and whatnot. So it's but it doesn't give you like the interfaces. You have to build those yourself. The other thing, and that's obviously third parties like Auth0, you can integrate as well by setting up the authorizers. This gets a little complex, and there's probably a 40-minute talk all on its own. So I just want to mention to you that these are available. So the last thing that we wanted to do with this, one of our goals was to be able to test. So with this solution, the testability is really up to us, because as long as we organize our code in a way that's testable, we don't have to worry about setting up some sort of big test fixtures that know about, that know about our framework. The nice thing is that these are just JavaScript functions. So we can just test this in any JavaScript testing suite. And if we want to also test things outside of, if we don't want to actually run it and test it in Postman, if we just want to test it ourselves, we can also run this SLS invoke, and that then we can specify a function and it'll run a function for us. That's another way, and we can specify what parameters we're sending in and stuff like that. So that's another way to manually test something. But it'll go like it'll bypass some of the API gateway stuff and just send it directly to the function. And but yeah, so this is really nice because we don't have to create something really complicated with our testing. So I think I've kind of shown you the basics of here's how to get started with creating an API. So one last thing that I want to do today is just acknowledge the land where I'm presenting from is part of the sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Native American Nation and the 11 Indigenous First Nations that lived in the U.S. state of Wisconsin. But in an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede their territory where I now live. So I just this is something that is getting more common in the U.S. is to acknowledge the ancestry and heritage of where we live, where we're presenting from. So I will be putting out some of these links via Twitter. So if you want to follow me, check that out. You can see those. But I'd like to thank you. Once again, my name is Derek Binkley, the engineering lead at Localize. And if you have any questions, we have just a few minutes left. So feel free to add those to the Q&A. Thanks. Okay. Well, since I'm not seeing any questions or anybody typing, I just encourage you, if you have more stuff to follow up on, you can find me online. I'll be happy to chat and discuss any of this. And I'd like to thank you for your time and hope you have a great rest of your evening.